Okay, this is incredibly important in maintaining an accurate understanding of this week's protests. Despite claims from Trump and his press secretary and a ton of different right wingers that Antifa was doing all sorts of violence in Washington, D.C. at the protests this week, the FBI has found no evidence that Antifa was involved in the Washington, D.C. violence on Sunday. That's the day that the protests sort of had peak violence or unrest. They've become more and more peaceful throughout the week. Now, the reason this matters is that one of the ways that the Trump administration has waged a propaganda war against the overwhelmingly peaceful protesters is by making them seem co-opted by Antifa and overwhelmingly violent. Trump, of course, even tweeting on Sunday night, quote, "The United States of America will be designating Antifa as a terrorist organization." We already talked on Monday about the legal reality and constitutionality of Trump doing that. I don't want to rehash that today, but it actually doesn't matter because it was a political tool which was followed up on Monday with Trump saying, "I may send the U.S. military to states against governor's wishes," to further repress the protesters who he is insisting are overwhelmingly violent lawbreakers. Now, if you believe the protesters are more violent than they are, you are more likely to support Trump's idea of sending in the military. If you believe that violent Antifa, which again, remember, there's no real I mean, Antifa is more of a strategy and an umbrella term than an organization. If you believe violent Antifa is a predominant factor at these protests, you're more likely to look the other way at repression of protesters by police. Well, we now have documents from the Washington FBI field office which say very clearly, as of 5 p.m., based on CHS canvassing, open source and social media partner engagement, and liaison, FBI Washington field office has no intelligence indicating involvement or presence of Antifa. Now, I want to be really, 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 really clear here. This is one location on one day. It was claimed that Antifa were all over DC. The FBI found that they were not. This doesn't mean that there was no Antifa presence anywhere. Clearly, there was some presence of whatever we are defining as Antifa. The issue with all of this is that Antifa itself is, first of all, tiny. And secondly, it's completely sparse in its organization. And I want to make really crystal clear before I start getting you the emails and the tweets and all of it. I am not telling you that I am supportive of Antifa's tactics. I'm not denying that people operating under the general banner of Antifa have done violence in the past. Of course they have. I'm not aware of Antifa ever killing anybody, but there has been violence done by people sort of purporting to be under the umbrella of Antifa, and I am against that. The point is, number one, Antifa is more of an idea and a strategy than it is an organization where we can say the KKK was present here. Okay, well, that's a much more defined group. There is a leadership structure, there is membership, there are meetings, blah, blah, blah. That is not the case with Antifa, and that's why this is all fundamentally a distraction. The protests are mostly peaceful. Have there been bad actors? Of course there have. Looters have looted while protesters have protested. The point is, whether or not they subscribe to the general umbrella term of Antifa, it lacks all organization and it doesn't change that the bad actors are incredibly small in number. Whether the non-peaceful protesters are or aren't Antifa is actually irrelevant here because Antifa is not an organization with an established structure, leadership, or the like. It's a way to justify using force against protesters. It's a way to justify Trump sending in the troops literally. And it's a way to disqualify the activism concerns of the protesters. Tuesday night, we did a live stream looking at protests in, I'm trying to think now, Boston, New York City, Denver, DC, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Columbus, Ohio. There were a couple other places. I don't remember exactly. There was no violence anywhere during the 2-hour stream where we were just watching protests in all of these places, with the exception of about 5 minutes in Atlanta where protesters destroyed, you know, those chain link fences that go around a construction site? Some of that fencing was destroyed. And there were even claims that the reason that happened is because police were releasing tear gas and protesters had to, in order to get away from it, rip down some of that fencing. That may be true or not, doesn't make it okay. But the point is, we had to spend 2 hours to find 5 minutes across 8 or 10 cities of something that was short of peaceful protesting. The reason this is being done is that Trump can't lead any other way. I told you on Monday, Tuesday, he doesn't have any other tools other than criticize the people getting the media attention and think about how can you deploy more shows of force. Later in the program, I'm going to talk to you about Donald Trump, again, obsessed with tanks, starting to ask the Pentagon questions about what sort of tanks could we deploy as a show of force along with the military. Pentagon appears to be turning against Trump. Trump's former Secretary of Defense, Jim Mattis, denouncing Trump. And we're going to get to all of that later. These are really fluid dynamics in terms of the relationships between institutions of power, where even the Pentagon and Department of Defense, not organizations that I find to be the epitome of altruism, not organizations where I say you can always trust the Department of Defense, even they are saying what Trump wants is too much. Remember to follow me on Twitter at @Pakman. And a quick reminder, if you regularly just consume a clip here or there on IGTV or YouTube or Facebook, we have a daily audio podcast. And I know a lot of you prefer audio podcasts, long form, to short video clips. We have a free audio podcast you can find on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play Podcasts, etc. Make sure you're subscribed to that for the daily show. Let me know what you think about the latest with the protests on Twitter at @Pakman, and we'll be right back.